Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about culture, and this is in lieu of a lecture. So you can look at the slides in Blackboard and have a look, and if you go through notes in the presentation, you'll see the kinds of things I was going to say. But the thrust of this presentation is really about the way that we use culture in occupational therapy, or rather the way that we have not actually, as occupational therapists, adequately considered the significance of culture in a profession that seeks to achieve health outcomes through looking at doing, being, becoming and belonging. So if you think about that mantra, doing, being, becoming and belonging, relating to health, then it is actually about cultural expression. Everything that we do is some form of cultural expression, whether it's kids playing in the playground and singing a skipping song, to the way that we make meals, the way that we sit down and watch the X Factor on a Saturday night for the takeaway, if that's what we do, or the way that we play particular games, knit sweaters, take part in a whole range of activities in the family, between ourselves, say online gaming communities, anywhere where there is a community in which we're expressing ourselves. So we might talk about student culture, we might talk about the NHS culture, social services culture, institutional cultures, and there may be as well lots of other ways in which, through origins, not just our ethnic origins, but our geographical origins, the communities we live and work in, the places we live and work in, the schools we went to, ways that our families interact with other members of the family or other communities. All those things help us to have a set of cultural locations in the world, and we have multiple cultural locations in the world. Some of those things are things that we acquire because we like these particular things, or because we've been somewhere and we've picked up a bit of this or that aspect of a culture that we've enjoyed. All they're things that actually are part of our makeup because we grew up with them. So we are complicated beings, and part of that complication is that each of us has a multiple layered set of cultural attributes, things that we probably consider to be part of our identity, and which make us unique in different ways. So we have a whole set of things which are not just preferences, but they are about the way that we relate to each other. And about the third slide down that presentation talks about how culture is one of the most complicated words in the English language, which indeed it is once you start to unpick what might actually constitute cultural expression. So it's very problematic, and it's not something to be frightened of. It's something more to be curious about. I think the key issue in tackling cultural issues is actually to be curious, and to want to be informed by what you're seeing or hearing or reading about or discussing in conversation. So to want to know more about somebody else's perspective is a very good beginning point for establishing a rapport with somebody that you're working with, and beginning the conversations that enable you to develop occupational therapy. But it's also important to have a kind of empathic understanding, and that means that the empathy that you may be able to show people comes from actually experiencing a wider range of perspectives, which you can do in lots of different ways. So one of the problems that we have in representing culture, particularly as an occupational therapy profession, which is composed in the UK mostly of white middle class women who are delivering the course, and indeed who make up the practitioners of the profession, is representing some notion of difference. If you look at the range of craft activities which over the years have been used in occupational therapy. A substantial number of them, not all of them by a long shot, but a substantial number of them have been constructed as arts and crafts, which derive themselves from the interest that occupational therapists at the beginning of the profession had in the arts and craft movement, which itself was about a kind of rediscovery of traditional arts activities and craft activities. Many of them had subsequently been associated with women, but that continued to be the case throughout most of the 19th and 20th century as occupational therapy was developed. So we kind of replicated a cultural notion of ourselves as women, and of offering activities which are oriented around women's interests, and that has been a serious barrier to occupational therapy intervention for a large part of our history. But it would not be a true picture to say that other activities were not considered. There were, certainly when I was training, large departments devoted to woodwork and to other activities. I mean, one of the groups I set up was a group which I set up with support work, which was a group which actually took things to bits. Sort of tinkering around group, which might be perceived as a sort of masculine activity. Most of the people who came to that actually were not just men, but that activity itself was introduced because we felt that we weren't really meeting a sufficient range of needs within the mental health population that we were trying to work with, and that was also about, if you like, reflecting some of the sort of cultural things that would appeal to a particular generation of people. So some of the aspects of culture are that they are bound by our gender, our perception of gender. They may be bound by a perception of time. If you think about, for example, the kind of music that you may listen to and the kind of music your parents may listen to, how you may listen to music, the devices you may use, and the devices your parents may use to listen to music. Not just the content necessarily. The content actually may not be that different, but it's about what people find acceptable in the way that music is presented. And that also is something which relates to the history of occupational therapy, which came at the end, or at the point of a significant growth in leisure. So the arts and craft movement, which was led by people like John Ruskin and William Morris, and informed some of the early ideas of occupational therapy, was about a retreat from mass consumerism, the production of shoddy, cheap goods in factories, and a return to craft principles. So getting people to do stuff for themselves was a key idea in occupational therapy, which came from precisely that kind of movement. And yet, actually, when you translate that into the way that we run groups now and get people to do things in the community, an awful lot of what we get people to do is really about encouraging people to consume things. And what are they consuming? Well, they're consuming a whole range of cultural artifacts, whether it's food, whether it's going to places, using different community resources, or expressing themselves through art, for example. All those things that people are engaged in are cultural artifacts. So that may be all well and good, and you might think about how it's fair enough to encourage people to engage in an activity like karaoke. But if a dominant profession is, or a profession composed which reflects a particular cultural dominance in society, is determining those activities, then it means that those activities have a problem of being able to authentically represent the interests of the people who are being served by that profession, and it affects whether people can actually kind of relate to the things that they're being offered. Do they see themselves being reflected in those activities? So one of the reasons why many older men, for example, tend to shy away from occupational therapy is they think they're going to be offered bingo, and they'd rather be down the shed. So what they want the therapeutic intervention which allows them to be in a space that they recognise as being a cultural space that they're comfortable with. And you can use that kind of example to see a whole other range of situations where we need to be open to reflecting a wider range of client needs. So translating that into this program, for example, and the teaching that we may do here, then one of the issues that is quite important in education, particularly actually in professional education, is having a curriculum which is decolonized and which actually admits a wider range of perspectives than just the same old Western or Northern Hemisphere perspective on how culture may be perceived. So this is really important. So if you think about the population of Sheffield at the moment, population of Sheffield is about 86% UK origin and 14% non-UK origin. There are 192 different languages, first languages spoken in just one of the wards of Sheffield. It has a reputation of being a city of refuge. So you're providing a set of activities for people in a community in Sheffield, then you need to think actually 2 in every 10 people that you're working with is probably going to have a different background to the dominant cultural perspective, and you need to create opportunities for people to benefit from the resources that you've got. You need to think about how you can open your repertoire, if you like, of interventions to be inclusive of all the possibilities that might come through your door. So it's impossible to develop culturally specific activities and hope you're going to be able to include everybody. But you can do things that are broad enough. So one of the things that has become very popular in UK occupational therapy intervention has been gardening, because gardening can actually accommodate a lot of different perspectives. It is about plants that actually originate in different countries. You can include things like cooking. You can include things like sharing different narratives about the plants that people have in their gardens and or that they're familiar with. And you can create a whole set of activities that enable people to engage together on their own terms, but using their own specific cultural knowledge in a shared activity. If we think about the issue of decolonizing the curriculum, then one of the reasons why you're trying to do that, you might look at some work that does that, particularly a philosopher called Boaventura de Sousa Santos, and I'll put some links up to the kind of discussions that he raises. One of the important issues that he says is if you present a monolithic culture, a culture that only represents its the dominant aspect, so a white culture, then you exclude all the other possibilities, and you prevent people from learning about or expressing those possibilities. So he uses the word epistemicide, which means the destruction of knowledge. And that would be a very dangerous thing to perpetuate. So we really do need to think about how, as occupational therapists, we open ourselves and open the profession and accommodate and use and celebrate all the different possibilities that are open to us culturally and are informed by those possibilities. So it's not just saying, okay, here is an hour of karaoke or whatever it might be, but that we use that karaoke, if it's karaoke, in an informed way, that it's with a genuine interest and knowledge in the kinds of things that people might want to do in that particular session, and that it seems to those participants as their experience of that activity is authentic and genuine. And that's something that we all look for. So, in a few years' time, I dare say, I'm in my 60s now, so possibly by the time you are 10, 15 years into practice, I might trundle up in your care home and you'll be introducing me to the music interest group. Now, if you still have Max Bygrave's records and you're expecting me to sing along with the War Years, I might be a cantankerous person who may demand some rather different experience. And I hope we might have an interesting discussion about the kind of music that's been significant to me and what I might actually enjoy singing along with in the future. So I'll leave you with that prospect, and go and have a look at the culture presentation and have a think about how that might be something that you apply in your assignment. Thanks very much.